and we're going to tell you a little bit about the H-1B visa. So, Lutka, what is the H-1B visa?
So H-1B, again, it's a non-immigrant type of visa status, and it is only for professional level workers. So what does it mean? Professionals are those holding at least bachelor's degree. It could be US bachelor's or higher, or it could be equivalent. So if some of our students have a degree from their home country, they may have a bachelor's degree or master's degree. It's good to do credentials evaluation. And if it is equivalent to the US bachelor's degree, they would be able to qualify for H-1B now, even though they didn't finish the US degree. So it's important not to forget the foreign degree and experience. We may have some people that already have the experience. And 3-for-1 rule here applies, which means that 3 years of work experience is equal to 1 year of academic studies. So potentially you could have someone with 12 years of experience, and that is equivalent to the US bachelor's degree. So number one, it's for professionals, and number two, the position must be a specialty occupation. So it's the one that requires a minimum of a bachelor's degree. So if you have an individual who has a master's degree and gets offer of employment to be admin assistant, that's not going to work, because not only the individual needs to have a minimum of a bachelor's degree, but the position must be professional, meaning requiring at least a bachelor's degree. So just some of the examples that are really easy.
Well, wait, before you go on to those examples, Lutka, so are you saying to me that if someone is, let's say, a sophomore or a junior at Pratt, and that they have, let's say, the equivalence of a US baccalaureate degree from home, and they have, let's say, an offer of employment from a US employer, they can apply for an H-1B?
Yeah, they would be eligible to apply, but of course,
Why?
we would have to make a connection. So if, right now they are pursuing some type of arts type of a degree, and that's the offered position, but then they have a degree from chemistry, they have a degree from their home country in chemistry, that's not going to work. So if, however, the foreign degree is evaluated as a minimum of a US bachelor's degree, so any credentials evaluation agency can do that. In fact, the students could do that as well. They can contact any company that does credentials evaluation, send them their diploma, transcripts, and they can get credentials evaluation just to see if it is equivalent to the US bachelor's degree. If it is, and that type of degree is related to the position that is offered to them, they would be eligible to proceed with the H-1B. But it's important that they have offer of employment. So it's not a free employment like OPT. They need a sponsor.
So let me go a little further with that, because first of all, so you work on a regular basis. You and I both work with credentials evaluation services. So if the students needed to do that evaluation of their, let's say, educational background from back at home, or let's say their experience equivalent to education, to just try to figure out where they are, we could provide them with that information, right? So we could help to connect them to those services. So that's perfect. And then my next question is: so if you have an individual who is, let's say they have a baccalaureate from at home in architecture, and then let's say they're doing a degree here in the United States, city planning or something, something that's that enhances that architectural degree, they could go ahead and do the H-1B if they have an offer. Could they continue to study if they wanted to while they're working? Is that something that they can do on an H-1B?
That's a funny example that you picked, because I just got request for evidence exactly on that, city planning and architecture. So I'm just going to use that example. My client had a degree from India in architecture, and then a degree here, pursuing degree here in city planning. And the position required bachelor's degree in architecture or related field. So the government had actually issue with it. And we provided credentials evaluation. We also mentioned that whatever he's pursuing is related, and it worked. But yeah, as you mentioned, the student can pursue studies while on the H-1B. In fact, the student would be able to pursue part-time studies. So many students like that once they get the H-1B. So it is possible.
And also another sort of side advantage to that is that when you're an H-1B, you're no longer an international student, which means that your tuition may go down a little bit. So
Yeah.
something to think about, also sort of an added benefit. So
So
I'm sorry, I cut you off. Let's talk about some of the other occupations that, are professional in nature.
it could be any. So there is no list, because even though we like to point out to Department of Labor's website and the handbook, it could be any occupation as long as we can prove that a bachelor's degree is required for that type of position, because you could have a position that, let's say, requires associate, but the company typically requires bachelor's because of the complexity. So that could work as well. So you don't really have, people will ask, well, is my position okay? It's hard to say. The analysis has to be done. Typically, we can tell just based on looking at the position, but it's also not just the job title, it's the job duties, how complex it is. Is it entry level? Like, there are many factors that go into the specialty occupation analysis, but these are just some examples that are really easy and no-brainer, such as lawyers and architects and teachers. Those are easy. And then you have some that are kind of gray area, and we have to make an argument that either industry normally requires a bachelor's degree, and we look at different advertisements to see what type of degree is required for that position, or we look at that employer. What do they historically, what do they normally require? Do they require a bachelor's degree in specific field or no? So there are many ways to determine whether or not it is a specialty occupation.
Right. But one of the really good ways that I like, it's kind of a rule of thumb that I've always used, is that I go to the Dictionary of Occupational Titles, which is the U.S. Department of Labor's Bible on jobs. And every single job in the United States is listed in that document. Again, it's called the DOT, Dictionary of Occupational Titles. And every single job in that 2-volume collection, which is available online, has an SVP code. SVP stands for Specific Vocational Preparation Code. And so anything that's over an SVP of 7 is considered to be professional. Anything under is not considered to be professional. So that's a good rule of thumb. And it also helps you to sort of try to figure out what the wages that should be associated with the position, because there is a crosswalk that you can take to the OES, the Occupational Employment Statistic, which tells you what the wage is supposed to be for a position of that nature, depending upon what the demographics are, like where you're going to have that job. So that's something also to keep in mind. Nice way to figure out what the federally mandated prevailing wage is, because that's something that also we have to analyze, is whether or not the individual who's taking up that H-1B is going to be paid the federally mandated prevailing wage, right?
Yeah.
So we spent a little time talking about how important today was, because we have actually here in our office, we have a bunch of our staff are registering H-1Bs for employers across the country. So the H-1B Lottery actually opened up just about an hour and a half ago, an hour and 15 minutes ago. And it's going to be open until March 25th. So for employers who want to
But
register.
why, let's say I'm a student and I'm just curious, why is there a lottery for H-1B?
Well, so that's a great question. So what happened was there's a quota on the number of H-1Bs that are available. And I think we have that in a slide further on, but there's 65,000 H-1Bs that are available for individuals who have the equivalence of a US baccalaureate degree. And again, as Ludka properly pointed out in the prior slide, that can be demonstrated either by way of experience, by way of education, or a combination thereof. So, so that's the way you would be able to prove the equivalence of the U.S. baccalaureate degree. There's also a 20,000 allocation for individuals who have a U.S. master's degree from qualifying master's program.
Or higher.
Or higher, right? Could be a PhD, that's right. Or higher from qualifying organizations in the United States that are able to confer those types of master's degrees on their
So
students.
PhD from university in Germany is not going to work.
That's right. They would have to be into the
US.
they would have to be in the 65,000 cap. So, and it's kind of interesting because, you know, just to show my age and how long I've been practicing, I used to do H-1Bs when there was no quota. So
Me
back
too.
in
No,
back
but
in,
it was, I'll tell you exactly. I specifically remember it was 2008 when we
no,
when
no.
we had
So
lottery.
so Ludka, going back even further, in 1988, when H-1Bs were still under the old laws before 1990, there was no quota at all. So we could do as many as we wanted. Then what happened was in 1991, they implemented the 65,000 quota. And the reason why they did that is because that's when they created the O, the P, the Q, and the R classifications in 1991. So they said, well, you know, we're going to pull out all those other visas. And what we're going to do is we're going to limit the number of H-1Bs that are available. And then in 2008, you're absolutely right. That was a little different. What happened was the quota was still there, but we never met the quota.
Correct.
Right.
We were
Those are
filing
great.
H-1Bs the whole year.
Yeah. So there's a little historical perspective. But the thing is that the demand has become so great that now it's a lottery where what you end up having is on the 65,000 per year, you have 3 H-1B registrations for every one place. And for the 20,000, you have 1.3 for every one place. So oftentimes the students, you guys ask, what are the odds? Well, so the odds for the 65,000, which is the bachelor's or equivalent, is 3 to 1. And the odds on the masters are 1.3 to 1. So the answer there is if you have a master's, you have a much better chance of getting an H-1B. So that also leads to the inescapable conclusion, which we always like to point out, is that stay in close touch with your international student office, because a fallback option is going back to school, getting that master's degree, and then going back into the lottery the next year, because then you may have a possibility of being able to get that H-1B.
I'm going to just quickly read a question because I think it's a good one. Does a student in STEM program have advantage in H-1B lottery compared to other students in regular program? And the answer is no. So unfortunately, the only advantage you have, which we love when you with somebody's in STEM, because you'll have more time to try your luck in the lottery. So that's the only advantage, but otherwise it doesn't matter. And even within the US master's degree, David, not every US master's degree will qualify.
That's right.
So, you know,
you have to be careful to go to a school that allows you to be able. So the way you can look at it is for-profit academic institutions generally cannot confer master's degrees that are eligible for the H-1B in the master's program, but not-for-profits can. But that's rule of thumb.
I just want to ask everyone, please, because everyone is writing questions just to me, just put it for everyone so I can keep responding so you can see the responses. So when you're typing the question, just don't put it as a private, just put to everyone, because I think it's going to be helpful for your friends as well.
Everyone usually has the same question, right?
Everyone has the same question. So I'm going to go back just to this timeline, because I think it's very important just to go over it. We are in registration period right now. By April 1st, we should know who is going to be selected. And then the actual filing of the H-1B, so all the forms and applications, that starts on April 1st and it runs until June 30th. So thank goodness we have some time. We have 3 months to file all those H-1Bs that were selected. And, you know, last year, I don't know if it's going to be the same, but last year we had another lottery. So those selected H-1Bs that were not used, they were thrown to the pool again. And in August, the government ran second lottery. They selected, you know, other cases as well. And then we've had 90 days, I think, again, to file the H-1Bs. Remember that the start date of the H-1B is October 1st. So even if you file the H-1B, you get approval, let's say in June, it really kicks in on October 1st. So if you're in the US, you have the F1, you're an OPT, then automatically on October 1st, your status will change to H-1B, assuming that your case was approved.
So the only other thing that I think is really important, Ludka, is that some folks who are on this webinar who have work authorization, which is going to expire during the summer, might be in a rush to file those H-1Bs because they want to take advantage of CapGap. CapGap says that as long as you file your H-1B before you run out of work authorization, if you're chosen in the lottery, of course, then what you'll be able to do is to continue your work authorized status through through October 1st. So very important to keep your eye on the CapGap period.
David, do bigger companies have a better chance over the startup? Well, with the lottery, no, is the same.
So the lottery, right? The lottery's the same. It certainly would be, you know, I would say it's certainly helpful for us because there are two things that are important, I think, when we're putting together the H-1B. One is financial stability is important and longevity is important. And so those make stronger cases. But we've done cases for startup companies. You know, I think that it depends upon, it depends a lot upon the company, whether it has the, you know, again, the financial stability, even if it's a startup. You're going to be looking at different things like who are the angels who are investing and what is the burn rate on, you know, on the investment. So, but no, there's no discrimination based on large and small.
It may be easier, obviously, with more established company, because with the smaller companies, we have done a lot of startups, you know, but you can get requests for additional evidence, so they may question it more. But other than that, you know, if it's a bona fide position, it will be fine. So, you know, I think
larger and more established companies are just easier cases for us as lawyers to do, because we don't end up with these really nasty requests for evidence that question every little thing about the company. So it just makes it a little easier.
This is a good question. I'm gonna actually take that because that will lead us to talk about, you know, the rule regarding the wages and for next year. Does certain wages, making certain wages makes it easier to be picked in a lottery, David?
So
not this year.
So I think that question probably emanates from something maybe that student had read online or in the newspaper about a proposal that the Trump administration had left, which the Biden administration was trying to figure out how they wanted to deal with it. It was put to the backside, but not eliminated altogether. And actually remnants in the Citizenship Act of 2021 leave open the possibility in the future for them to implement a priority wage choosing methodology in next year's H-1B process. But this year, we don't have to deal with that.
Basically, the higher the salary, the better the chance within the certain category, because there are 4 levels, right? So I'm just gonna take, for example, graphic designer. So entry level would be level 1, then higher level, you have level 2, 3, 4. So those where the employer offers level 4 salary would have a preference in the lottery.
Right. Well, that's the new proposal if it goes through. So basically what they're thinking about doing, at least what the Trump administration proposed, was running. So you'll submit your H-1B and they're going to run a lottery on all the level 4 wages. Then they're going to run a separate lottery on all the level 3 wages. then they're going to run a separate lottery on all the level 2 wages. And so by the time you get down to level 1, most of the H-1Bs will already be eliminated because there's not going to be much left for the level 1 wages. So what they're essentially doing is they're saying that they will. Now, the problem with that, unfortunately, is it really discriminates against individuals who work for religious organizations, NGOs, not-for-profit organizations, other types of governmental organizations. So there are some issues, hospitals. So there are some issues, unfortunately, with that. But what we're seeing in the news is that they're thinking about doing carve-outs for some of these other types of organizations so that there is not a form of salary discrimination that goes on. So we're keeping our eye very closely, of course, on any developments in this area, but they're not really relevant for this particular lottery season, again, which runs from today until March 25th. That'll be more relevant for what's to come in the future.
So H-1B is valid typically for 3 years and can be extended for another 3 years. So total is 6 years. That should give you enough time to hopefully get the green card. But any time that you spend outside of the US, you can get back, you can recapture. And then for the Indian nationals and Chinese nationals, that they have to wait, unfortunately, for the green card really long time because those countries are retrogressed. They could get the H-1B beyond the 6 years, assuming that they proceed with the green card in a timely manner and they get I-140 petition, which is a second step of the green card process, approved. So there are some options. We have some clients that have had H-1B for 10, 15 years while they're waiting for the green card. H-1Bs we mentioned are employer specific, so you need an employer. And I know somebody asked me a question about it. If you can be a self-petitioner, if you have company and nobody else is in the company, just you, it's not possible. There has to be employer-employee relationship. So you really need an employer to offer you a job. As far as the lottery, you're only going to do that once. So H-1Bs are portable. What that means, you can change the employer. So you're not going to be going through the lottery each time you're changing the employer. It's just once within the 6 years. And let's say that you work for your employer for company A for 1 year, then you get better offer from a company B. That company B will have to file the H-1B, the full H-1B petition, but no lottery. You could even have concurrent H-1Bs. What does it mean? So let's say you have company A, you work for 20 hours, and then you have company B where you're working as well for, let's say, 10 hours per week. So that's allowed. You would have 2 H-1Bs, and that's called concurrent H-1Bs. And that leads me to the next point, that part-time H-1Bs are totally fine. You don't have you have a same option. I mean, it's the same type of, in the lottery, you're not going to have better chance with the full-time. For some reason, everyone thinks that, but it's not true. You could even file, your employer could file for part-time H-1B for 10 hours per week. We've never seen any issues with that. So again, part-time H-1Bs are totally fine.
Last year, we did multiple part-time H-1Bs for Pratt students, and many of them were successful. I would say probably at least 75 to 80% of them were successful and chosen in the registration. So,
David, there are some companies that are exempt from the cap. Can you tell us a little bit about that, when the cap and lottery doesn't apply?
Right. So obviously, if not everyone is going to win in the lottery, but one of the things to consider either before applying or after is whether or not you can get an exemption from the H-1B cap. So the first thing that you want to look at is, are you working with an academic institution? Because obviously work with an academic institution qualifies as a cap exempt H-1B. Another cap exempt H-1B is if you're working with an organization that is affiliated with an academic organization, or let's say that you're working for a not-for-profit research organization or a governmental research organization, those also may qualify for cap exemptions. So what Luca and I tend to find, though, is a lot of times the employers don't even realize that sometimes they are cap exempt. So usually what ends up happening is that they'll try to do an H-1B in the cap, in the registration period. And then all of a sudden, after, let's say, the person hasn't won, they'll circle back around and we'll take a look at it and say, oh, well, maybe you're cap exempt. And then what we'll do is we'll be able to figure out, based upon an analysis that we could do of the institution, whether or not they are in fact exempt from the cap. But think about it this way, it's like academic institutions are microcosms of the world. Every single academic institution has jobs in it that are available to individuals just like any other job in the private sector. You have graphic designers, you have folks who are working in the bursar's office who are doing finance, you have people who are doing marketing for academic institutions throughout the country, and so on. So think about how your skill set may lend itself to a potential job opportunity in either the academic institution you're presently in or at any other academic institution across the country.
But, we are unsure which colleges and universities sponsor. And every university, from my experience, they have their own policies. Some will not sponsor at all, even though it's a cap exempt. Some will say only tenure track. So you would have to check with that particular university or college, who do they typically sponsor? But, David, I have a question for you. Is there any list of H-1B employers?
So there is a list of H-1B employers that's available online. I know I've seen it.
H-1B Data Hub. So if you Google H-1B employer data hub, you're going to get list of H-1B employers that typically sponsor, but you have to know that anyone can sponsor. So if you find a company, small company that have never done the H-1B, they can file an H-1B for you. So you shouldn't limit yourself to that list, because it could be any company that is willing to offer you a job and sponsor you.
And Lutka, I'm not sure if that data hub information is what I'm thinking of. I know that all the LCAs are public information through the Department of Labor. So any company that's done an LCA, a labor condition application, then is also doing H-1Bs, which means that they're sponsoring. So that might be another lead for our students about organizations that are sponsoring H-1Bs.
Okay, so I'm just reading the question. Somebody's asking if after March 25th, it's unfortunately, if you don't get an offer and your employer will not do the H-1B registrations, you're not going to be able to proceed with the H-1B
in this cycle.
Year. So it would be only
maybe next year.
It would be a next year. Exactly. So I'm just going to.
There's another question here. And the question is it necessary to stay in the same state where the job is while applying for the H-1B? The answer there is no. You should know that the H-1B is a prospective opportunity, which means that you can be anywhere you want to be. Remember, OPT is going to govern your here and now, but then the H-1B takes effect on October 1st. So it has to do with a prospective offer for an opportunity in the future, which will become effective on October 1st. Okay.
So let's say, David, that some students will not make it in a lottery at all, or even better, let's say that they contact you or they contact us way before the H-1B, let's say in December, and we typically review the resume. What if, we may see a better option for them? So, this slide is called H-1B alternatives, but as you mentioned, our students from Pratt, many times, they may have, for example, the O visa option that may be even stronger than H-1B. So it depends when the student or potential employer will contact us, or somebody else, but it's important to kind of understand what your option is. But if you are reaching out, your employer wants to sponsor you in July, there is no option for the H-1B. That's important to look at the alternatives that we're going to discuss right now. If you didn't make it in a lottery, then again, we're looking at alternatives as well. So I just want to point it out specifically for Pratt students that H-1B is not it. There are other options, and it's important to know what kind of options you have. Typically, what we do, we review the resume just to see, what options potentially you could have, because you may have more options. So David, where do we start when the student comes to you with the resume?
So a lot of times, we do the, like you said, Luca, we can do the analysis either before the H-1B registration or afterwards if the individual has not won the H-1B. But, I'm looking at the list here and I'm thinking I've probably done at least every single one of these for Pratt students. But e-visas depend upon where the individual is from. And e-visa presents sort of a unique opportunity for the students at Pratt, because if you're from a treaty country, which would, for example, be Japan or Korea or many of the Western European nations, you can form your own corporation. It's an E2 visa, investor visa. You can form your own LLC, and you do a business plan and you invest money into that business. And then what you do is you actually can work for your own business as an employee, and you can lease yourself out from your business to other businesses. And if those other businesses pay your business and your business pays you, that's sort of a nice way to have a form of self-sponsorship. And that gives our students at Pratt a unique opportunity to be able to render their services. This is especially helpful, I think, for graphic designers and folks who are involved in the gig economy, because they can do all these different gigs, which probably they might be already doing on their OPT, and they can do it through their own company and just channel the money back through their own investment company. So if you have questions about how to set that up and how to do that, we're more than happy to spend the time and explain that to you. Ls are a little less common, but they're an interesting opportunity because Ls are for intra-company transfers. These are individuals who are coming to the United States after working for 1 full year within the last 3 years for a foreign affiliate, parent, or subsidiary. So what you could do is, let's say if there's a business back at home that would be willing to hire you that ultimately wants to come to the US, you could go back home for a year, work there for a year, and then bring that business to the United States. So that's an interesting opportunity for you also. O1s, there are 2 different types. There's O1As, those are for individuals with extraordinary ability in the arts, sciences, and business. But the ones that are more common for our Pratt students are O1Bs, which are the artist visas, because it's a lower legal standard. You only need to prove distinction or renown in the field internationally. So that could be by virtue of individuals getting recognition in the media. It could be individuals who have awards, individuals who are basically anyone who's an artist qualifies potentially for the O1B. So that's a really nice opportunity.
Is there a lottery for O1, David?
There's not. And
or any deadline, any cap that we should?
No, the visas we're talking about here are not subject to deadlines and not subject to quotas. And that's the beautiful thing about them, is that, the only one right now that we have to deal with that has those quotas are the H-1B, although there is the H-1B1, which is under the Singapore-Chile Free Trade Agreement, which also has a quota, but that quota has never actually been met as far as I know.
Is there a prevailing wage? You mentioned with the H-1B that there is a minimum wage. With E or O, with any of those, is there a minimum wage that needs to be offered?
There's not a minimum wage, but there's a common sense approach that I usually refer to. So if you have an individual who's a essential worker on an E you want to pay an essential worker an essential salary. If you have an individual who is an individual with extraordinary ability on an O, you want to pay them accordingly so that at least you can say you're paying them an extraordinary wage. Yeah, so it's really a common sense approach. I would say that, at least for you and I, it's more of a smell test. Like we're going to, a student will send us an email and say, is it okay if I get paid $35,000 for this particular position? And I'll say, well, it's a little low. And if you're going in to try to make an argument that an individual is extraordinary, you probably want to put a wage in that's commensurate with an individual being recognized as extraordinary in their field. Oftentimes we get requests for evidence, and in those requests for evidence, they will ask about the wage, and they'll say, please justify why the H1B wage that you're giving is commensurate with an individual whose abilities are in fact extraordinary or outstanding in the field. And, so we make arguments, of course, if it just happens to be a lower wage, there are arguments that can be made, but, we try to tie it to the fact that the individual is being paid over, if possible, the federally mandated prevailing wage. Just makes it look better. So P's.
I'm sorry, I have a question about the O. Mm-hmm. So how many awards are required? Somebody is asking. So, I'm going to just answer. There is no specific number for anything. In fact, we just look at everything. We're looking at O. If we're looking at H1B, the standard is a little bit lower. But, we just look at all the factors. So we look at what type of awards. We look at the salary. David mentioned the salary. So there are different criteria. You don't have to meet all of the criteria. You have to meet some. But even within those, we've had people that would meet 5, but not very strong. Then we have people that will meet only 3, but very strong. So it just depends. Even if you meet the plain language of criteria, the government can still question it and say you're not internationally recognized. So it's very subjective. With H1B, it's more about the position. It's not about you. With O, it's very much about you and your credentials and your portfolio. So we can base it, we do it every day. We get resume either from individual or from the company, and we review the credentials and just give our opinion as to how strong the case is. But ultimately, it's up to the officer to decide. Sometimes, the case may be weak, and we will say that, well, it is on a weaker side, but it may be approved without any questions. Then you may have very strong case, and the government may question it. But, what we can offer, and typically other attorneys will offer, opinion whether it's approvable, whether you have a shot. So if you ask what's the percentage, we typically say 50-50 because you just never know.
Exactly. It's hard to give any guarantees because we're not the ones who make the decisions. The only thing that we can guarantee is that we'll do the best we possibly can to get the desired result by helping you to formulate a case that will meet the legal standard. Let's talk about Ps. Ps are for performing athletes and artists, and also for individuals who are doing something that's culturally unique. And these are generally granted in 1-year increments up to 12 years. But I think, Ludka, we also want to point out to the students who are on this webinar that the L, the O, the P, these are also dual intent visas. So just like the H-1B, they're nice springboards for applying for the green card. So keep that in mind too. And when we line up in doing, when we do this analysis that Ludka is talking about, and we line up, your best to worst scenarios, we also have in mind that, you're going to be possibly looking at the, at the green card application. So, we're going to be looking to do dual intent visa classifications for you. R visas. So do we have any religious workers? Individuals who are ministers, priests, or rabbis qualify for R1s. Professional religious workers qualify for R2s. And anyone who's doing a traditional religious function qualifies for R3. And what's really nice about those Rs is that they go directly to a green card in the EB4 classification after 2 full years of work with a religious organization, 501c3 religious organization, right?
Yeah.
B1s, if you're, if all else fails, if you can go on the payroll of the foreign company and be in the United States performing services on behalf of a foreign company. It's a nice little gap filler that we use from time to time. There's another visa type that's actually not even on this list that I just want to make our students aware of. It's called the I visa. It's for individuals who are foreign media representatives. So for those of you who, let's say you're an architect and you're put onto the payroll of a foreign media resource, and what you're doing is writing a column on a weekly basis about US architecture. That might be an opportunity to get an I visa. And the nice thing about the I visa, it's DS, duration of status. It's just like your F1. It's good as long as you continue to do the services that are associated, with your I visa. Ludka, what's a TN?
So TN is for Canadian nationals or Mexican nationals. And it's not a dual intent, but it's a really nice option for those that didn't make it in an H-1B lottery, because it is a work visa. There is appendix of, what is it, 106, 10603.
10603D1.
Yes,
yeah.
that lists all the occupations, but pretty much you just need offer of employment, degree, show that your offer is one of those occupations. And if you're Canadian, you can just process it at the border and enter. Mexican nationals will have to process it at the port of entry or do the change of status in the US. And the nice thing is that it could be approved for 3 years and indefinitely, just keep renewing it until hopefully you get the H1B in the lottery. So TN is really nice option. And E3, I don't know if you mentioned it, it's very similar. It's for Australians. So we always ask about passports. If you are, for example, Chinese or Indian national, we always ask, do you have another citizenship or passport? Because you may have Canadian, or maybe you're pursuing Canadian immigration, and that will open up another option for you, such as the TN, for example, or E2. I don't know if we mentioned it, David, about because I saw questions here, but those that have OPT and are applying for the H1B, you guys would have cap extension. So you, even though your OPT expires, let's say in June, assuming that you filed an H1B, your status will be extended until October 1st. So I just want to mention that we don't need any gap filler for those folks. And I see a question similar to that. I think somebody misunderstood. So the question is for H1B, so it's only available next year, even if I didn't use the OPT until the summer. So those that graduate now can apply. You have opportunity, but if you haven't even received the OPT, then of course you have next year. Your employer, actually it's perfect timing. If you graduate in May, you get your OPT, let's say in summer, then you will have an opportunity to get to know your employer and ask employer maybe at the end of the year during the review if they're going to sponsor you for the H-1B, and then you could proceed next year. The good time to start, because I know I saw that question, would be, I think the latest in January. The registration is in March. So, that's a good timing. It's a little bit worse for those that are going to graduate in December, because you're going to get your OPT in February, and that doesn't give you much time to kind of persuade your employer to proceed with the H-1B the following month in March. So, but for those graduating in summer, it's pretty straightforward. Hold on, I see.
That's pretty perfect.
Okay, I explained it. Do we want to jump into the green card? We have.
Sure.
Okay, perfect. We have about 10 minutes, so let's see if we can do it.